This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 187. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. Today we are talking about health anxiety. It is such a good episode. So we have back with us today Christian Newman. He's been on before. He was on episode number 152. We talked all about health anxiety. We are doing a follow-up just because we both get so many questions about health anxiety, particularly since the beginning of COVID. And so we really wanted to jump on, reinforce those main concepts, those main tools, answer the questions that you guys had. And so I am just really, really thrilled. And it was a really, really wonderful conversation. I really felt like we hit some really important key points. So I cannot wait to share that with you. Thank you so much for being here with me. As I say, every single episode, I am just so grateful for your time and your support. I know how valuable your time is. So thank you for trusting me with your valuable time resource. That's all I have to say, guys. Please do leave a review. Your honest reviews mean so much to me and help me know how I can do better or if I'm helping. So please do go ahead and leave a review. We are doing a giveaway. And once we hit 1,000 reviews, we will be giving away a free pair of Beats headphones, which I cannot wait to give away. You'll get to pick your own color. Such a good way to listen to podcasts. So please do go and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And let's just get over to the show. Well, welcome. I'm very excited. We have back with us Christian Newman from healthanxiety.coach. We have done an episode already, so welcome back.
Yes. Thank you. Glad to be back.
Yes, it's so good to have you. We have already done episode 152. We talked about health anxiety, and we're here to really square away our updates since then. I mean, a lot has happened since then.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Kimberly, for having me back. I have to say I had such a blast recording our last episode. And to this day, I get people coming to me, talking to me about how they heard that episode of the Anxiety Toolkit podcast and how they just felt like all of a sudden they weren't alone anymore. And you're right, so much has changed since then. Aside from people taking in that podcast and enjoying it and reaching out to me, we're also in this global pandemic, which has just continued to expand since the last time we talked. And kind of seems like it might be with us for a while. And a lot of people are struggling through it. Yeah. So I'm really happy to have the chance today to talk about some of the biggest questions that I get from people all the time.
And we were just chatting, for those listening, Christian and I were just chatting about how we did a poll on Instagram and we asked some questions and how the questions are overwhelmingly similar, right? That the experience of health anxiety seems to be very, very similar. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I was going through it myself, I felt like I was the only one, right? And that nobody could help me. But the truth is that the patterns of health anxiety and anxiety in general, they're so similar from person to person. It's crazy. And so I've met so many people across the entire world these past few years that have stories very similar to mine and very similar, although they don't know it, to one another.
Yeah.
And it might interest you to know that once upon a time, I offered a quiz on my website that people could answer and learn, sort of like to measure their level of health anxiety and how it might be impacting their quality of life. And the truth is that as I had more and more people respond to that quiz, put in their answers, of course, I saw all the results. I was just blown away by how similar everybody's results were. And so I wasn't really learning all that much from them, and they weren't really learning that much from it either. And so, what I'm really excited about to share now is that over the past several months, I've taken away that quiz so they can just skip the quiz and they can go straight to taking action that is going to help them address that anxiety and reduce the level of anxiety in their life and start making choices that move them forward rather than keeping them stuck. And how I do that is by just simply giving away the first couple of days of my 30-day program, which is called the 30-day Anxiety Detox. I talked about it in the last episode, but it's a great program, and it's what I used myself to overcome it, and students worldwide have done the same. And I just give them the first couple of days so they can feel the impact of really truly understanding what anxiety is all about and start taking action to address it and really start to build their practice that just kind of promotes the healthy life free of anxiety that they want. And so really excited to talk to you today about what some of those questions are. And how similar they are from person to person.
Right. Before we get into the questions, because I have a lot, we've actually had way more questions and we had to kind of cut them down. But I wanted to first thank you personally. Since our most recent conversation, this was so impactful to me in that you talked about creating a contract and having your family sign a contract. And I did that and it changed my life. So I wanted to thank you personally because that was incredibly powerful practice. I was really exhausted at the time, going through a lot and had a lot of stress and so forth. So I wrote myself not a health anxiety contract, but a life contract. I had my kids sign it, my husband signed it, my best friend signed it. It was so good. So thank you so much for that because it changed so much for me.
That was the one thing that really changed things for me because I had just accepted that health anxiety and anxiety in general was what was underlying everything that was going on in my life. You know, leading up to that, I felt like the symptoms were the result of some physical illness, right? And the truth is that the symptoms were the result of the discomfort I was creating for myself through the choices that I was making all day long, every day. And they weren't the cause of the discomfort that I was feeling after all. And when I came to that level of acceptance and actually started to write down the role that I played in getting to the point where I was, and with pen and paper or finger to keyboard or however you do it, my responsibility in that, and also my responsibility for making better choices going forward, and exactly what those choices would be, the benefits that I would receive as a result of sticking to it, and the consequences that I would face as a result of not sticking to it, and really kind of made it public in a sense by sharing it with others. Wow, that was when things started to change really fast for me. And so who was the person who said, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail?
Plan to fail.
Who was it? Was that Edison? Jefferson? I don't know. Somebody much smarter than me. But it just warms my heart to hear how you took that step and how powerful it was for you, because I've never seen a student of mine who took that step and reinforced it every day through their practice fail.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
they just haven't.
It wasn't. It was, for me, it was actually setting these boundaries and limits with myself on what I was and wasn't allowing myself to do. And then again. And why. And then again, having my children sign it, and they're very young. So they were like, I don't really understand. But I explained to them, these are the rules that Mom's going to do from now on. It was just very, very cool. And so I just wanted to personally thank you for that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So here we go. There are so many important questions here. So we're just going to go through them in no particular order. Okay. So someone has asked, how do I know when my symptoms are anxiety and when there's something serious? So how may they differentiate between the two?
Yeah, and this is something that I faced very early on. And that's why when I work with students, and in fact, in the 30-day Anxiety Detox, we address this way up front, right? And part of it has to do with just understanding truly what anxiety really is, right? It's very easy to confuse some of the symptoms of anxiety with the symptoms of
Death.
physical illnesses,
Yeah.
put it at that,
Yeah.
right? Just like it's easy to confuse the symptoms of common cold with the symptoms of COVID-19, right?
Mhm.
Like some of them, you get a sore throat or you have a headache or you're something like that, right? You have a cough. These things are similar and it's never black and white, right? But when we are challenged by anxiety, we fall into this black and white type of thinking, right? In fact, that's one of the anxious behaviors that we engage in. And so, one of the first things that I recommend people do is really truly understand what anxiety is, how and why it may or may not manifest in the body, right? And so, when you are in a situation in life and you start to feel your heart racing or your breath is a little short or you're sweating or whatever it is, you can reflect on what that situation you're in may be at that time and really be able to link it back to, okay, it's normal that I would expect to feel this way in this sort of situation because I'm about to record a podcast with Kimberly that is about to be broadcast around the world. And you know what? I've done podcasts a lot of times, but even as that Skype call was ringing, as you were calling me, you better believe my heart was a little bit elevated. You better believe that I was feeling a little bit different than I would at rest. So that's sort of the number one thing, is to really educate yourself about what anxiety is, how it manifests in the body in certain situations, and why, right? The second thing that I would say is that if you are challenged by health anxiety, you probably have had a lot of your symptoms evaluated before. You've asked your friends, you've asked your family, you've asked your doctor inevitably about them, and your doctor's evaluated them and probably said, hey, you know what? You're fine. Or, hey, you know what? The symptom that you're experiencing is associated with some illness. Like, it is possible, right? It'll happen to all of us at some point in our life. And here's what you need to do in order to heal it. So when you get that information, whether it is a negative diagnosis or something that you need to work on to improve your health, either way, that is evidence for you of, that you can use when you feel discomfort, when you experience some sort of a symptom. And you can link it back to that and just sort of rationalize, hey, I felt this headache before. My doctor has talked about it with me and said that it's nothing of concern. And sure enough, it usually goes away after a couple of days, particularly if I get better sleep and hydrate a little bit better, or maybe do a little bit more exercise. So you can sort of follow a rational approach.
Right.
But the truth is that you don't always know with absolute 100% certainty what's causing that headache. There's no such thing as having that 100% certainty. All you can do is, number one, have the knowledge and interpret it in a rational way based on that knowledge and evidence. And number two, take a rational approach to how you're going to deal with it, right? So when you have the headache, step one, hydrate a little bit better. Step two, go to bed a little bit earlier. Step three, get good nutrition. Step four, get a little bit of exercise. If you go through those series of steps for several days, and there's more, obviously, and it's still around after several days, then maybe you take a Tylenol or something like that. Maybe that's step two or step whatever. And then if it continues to persist, maybe you make a note, hey, I'm going to mention this to my doctor next time I see him or her, right? That doesn't mean you drop everything and rush to the doctor right at that given moment. That's what I would have done at one point in my life. But you sort of follow this stepwise rational approach to dealing with it. And in the meanwhile, just make room for that uncertainty, for that discomfort in your experience. And this is something that takes practice. And that's why you'll always hear me refer to it as a practice, right? We're building this practice that promotes a healthy life free of anxiety. That doesn't necessarily mean we're building a life that is 100% symptom free for the rest of our existence, right? or 100% uncertainty free for the rest of our existence, right?
Right.
We need to learn to make room for that discomfort, whether it comes physically or mentally or otherwise, and respond to it using choices that promote that life we want, not resist that life we fear we already have.
Right. And that's the key. That was so powerful about the contract, right? Is making rules on like, this is how I handle these situations from now on. Or like, think I remember you saying something about like how often you use the thermometer or something like that. So yeah, I think that's so, so powerful. The next question, we had a lot of people asking similar questions. So I'm going to kind of group this into being like a bigger, open-ended question. Is like, how do I deal with topics such as stopping Googling or not focusing on sensations or not checking body parts? What would be your advice on people who are wanting, they've identified these behaviors are not helpful, like you've identified before. What would be your advice for them to reduce or eliminate those behaviors?
Yeah, there are so many of them, you're right. Whether you're talking about preventive behaviors, which are those that they aim to prevent us from experiencing discomfort in the first place, right? So, no, I'm not going to go to that event because it will be noisy and crowded and, it could make my headache worse, right? So that's a preventive behavior. Or there's the restorative ones, which is like, I'm feeling discomfort right now and I need to make it go away right away. And so we engage in these behaviors, which include worrying, which include rushing to the doctor to seek reassurance, which include jumping on Google and doing research, which include, engaging in immediate deep breathing to try and suppress those uncomfortable sensations and thoughts and things like that. There's so many of them. But how you deal with them all is exactly the same way. But before I explain how that works, I want to just make very, very clear one concept. And that is that when you engage in those behaviors, you're seeking rewards. You're seeking some sort of biochemical rewards for your brain that are associated with alleviating that discomfort, right? So, for example, you rush to the doctor, seek reassurance because you have a headache. The doctor does an examination, asks you some questions, and says, I really don't think this is anything to worry about. Try to get a little bit more rest, try to hydrate a little bit better, make sure you get good nutrition, and all those things that we mentioned before, right? When the doctor tells you this, you feel relief. You're like, oh, this feels so much better now, right? So you get this biochemical rewards coming to your pleasure center in your brain that your subconscious mind says to itself, hey, I like this feeling. This feels better. Next time I experience a headache, I'm going to make the same choice, right? I'm going to drop everything, rush to the doctor, seek reassurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? These are how habits are formed, right? But every time that you experience that discomfort, you always have a choice, right? Are you going to go left and engage in those choices that have become habits, right? That keep you stuck, like dropping everything, rushing to the doctor, seeking reassurance, jumping on Google, whatever it is for you. And it could be many of them. Sure was for me. So you can go left and you can follow that same pattern and you can receive those same rewards, but in a way that keeps you stuck and prevents you from moving forward in life and overcoming health anxiety and beginning to finally pursue your goals and live that healthy life free of anxiety that you aspire to, right? So you can do that, or you can go right. And when you go right, it's a little bit harder in the beginning because you need to make choices that make room for that uncertainty or discomfort to persist, right? So yes, I have a headache, but what I really need to do right now is record that podcast with Kimberly. And then after that, I need to go pick up my kids from school and, have a nice outing with them because it's Friday. And I need to do all of these things. But all of those things that I mentioned, they all move me forward in life, right? They build my business. They help other people. They strengthen my relationship with my kids. And none of them are associated with suppressing or alleviating that headache right away, right? But chances are, if I do all of those things, I will have a healthier, more balanced life to begin with. And through my practice, going to bed on time, hydrating well, et cetera, that headache is inevitably going to go away, right? So I have those two choices. One is easy at first, but makes things harder for you in the long term if you go left. One is hard at first because you make room for that discomfort and uncertainty, but better in the long term, right? And at the end of it, once you've taken those positive actions that you need to take, recording that podcast, going and picking up the kids, having a nice Friday outing, once you do those things, those positive actions, as I like to call them, guess what? You receive the exact same biochemical rewards that forms habits. And so you're getting like the actual result, biochemically speaking, is exactly the same. It's just you choosing how you're going to get it, right? Are you going to go left? You're going to go right. What's it going to be, right?
Right.
And so we need to slow things down. First of all, we need to observe our patterns. We need to recognize what are the things that lead up to me jumping on Google or dropping everything and rushing to the doctor. What are the situations and experiences that tend to lead to those, right? So a lot of it is sort of being mindful of, and, I even provide my students with a spreadsheet, a template that they can start making note of these over and over and over and over again. Once they have like 50 rows on that spreadsheet, it's going to be pretty clear, A, what are the behaviors that they tend to engage in, and B, in what sorts of situations.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can start to catch yourself earlier and earlier in the process. And when it was me, it would be after I've already taken the thermometer out and read the temperature on it, right? And it would be like,
whoopsies.
I got hooked again. But then later, it would be just as I was sticking it in my mouth.
Yeah.
And then later, it would be just as I was reaching for, because I became a lot more mindful and aware of what these patterns were and when I was engaging in them.
Right.
And eventually, the thought of reaching for the thermometer or whatever it was, blood pressure cuff, whatever, never even crossed my mind. And it doesn't until this day, right? And so, it's a whole practice of, number one, mindfulness, recognizing those patterns. Number two, being aware of the choices that we're making, left versus right. And number three, making those choices and reinforcing them through our actions, and then inevitably receiving those same rewards that says to our mind, hey, next time I encounter this sort of a situation, this is the choice I'm going to make next time.
Right.
And again, you just keep doing that. You keep building your practice. And before you know it, new habits are formed.
Right. I think you've almost answered a different question that I had for you, which was, what you're talking about is ultimately a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Or a form of even some version of exposure and response prevention, right? Which are two scientifically proven ways to treat health anxiety, particularly the idea of reducing these compulsions. What somebody had asked, and I talk about that a lot, right? Because I'm always talking about ERP, but they had said, is there anything other than CBT and ERP that can help for health anxiety?
Yeah, and I get a similar question to this a lot, where somebody will reach out to me, somebody who's been challenged by health anxiety for some time, and they'll say, I'll sort of ask them, hey, what's your plan for dealing with this? Like, where are you at right now and where are you sort of headed? And they'll say to me, well, I'm starting CBT next week. And I'll say, okay, that's great. CBT is great. I love CBT, right? It was one of the keys to unlocking this healthy life free of anxiety that I have today. But I always say that a healthy life free of anxiety, it's like a safety deposit box in the bank, right? I don't know. Some listeners might not know what a safe deposit box is, but a safe deposit box is like a box where you can keep your super valuable documents and,
like a safe,
treasures or whatever that is in the vault of the bank. And in order to open this box, you need multiple keys, right? In order to reveal the treasure inside, the valuables inside. No one key turned at one time could ever open the box. It needs to be multiple keys turned simultaneously in order to open the box. And I think with a safe deposit box, it's like 2 or 3 keys or something like that. But take my word for it, with health anxiety, it's not 2 or 3. It's, 5 or 10, right? So CBT, definitely one of the keys to unlocking the healthy life free of anxiety that you aspire to live, right? But what about mindfulness? What about ERP? What about systematic desensitization or exposure therapy, it's called, right? What about a healthy diet?
Yeah.
What about regular, consistent sleep patterns? What about exercise?
Yeah.
Right? All of these are keys, right? And there were probably, like I said, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. And indeed, during 30-day Anxiety Detox, the program that I take all of my students through, we obviously don't have time within 30 days to dive super deep into all of these different aspects of their life and all these different approaches that they can take in concert with one another, right? It's like a symphony. It all kind of works together to help them build that practice that is inevitably going to get them to the life that they want. And so, yeah, CBT is great. Yeah, ERP is great. But there's so much more to it. And you have to take what I call a holistic approach. Holistic meaning not necessarily meaning entirely natural. Like a lot of people think holistic means entirely natural, right? Could be that. But holistic in the sense of treating all aspects of the person.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Because it could involve medication too, right? Like for some people, which,
could.
you know, so I think you're right. And I think that that's true. I mean, even after our conversation last week, I mean, how interesting. I mean, we could even use this as an example of I do CBT and for myself, and I have a therapist and I take care of my body and I have an exercise. But then you told me about the contract and that kind of shifted things a little. So it's like it is multiple things, right? Yeah. It is multiple things. I love that answer. I really think that that's important to recognize. I'm throwing in a question for you, actually. This is like in from left field.
Put me on the spot.
I'm putting you on the spot. A few months ago, a clinician had mentioned to me that he had seen a correlation between health anxiety and self-esteem. Have you noticed that?
Yes, but I could maybe use a different word than self-esteem if I could. I would say that I've seen a strong correlation between health anxiety or anxiety in general, because I had generalized anxiety as well, between anxiety and self-efficacy.
Yeah.
Right. Which is different than self-esteem.
Yes.
A little bit, right? Some people confuse them. But self-efficacy is that belief in your own ability to navigate any challenge that may come your way, basically.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
And so when we have low self-efficacy and anxious patterns, then we begin to doubt our ability to overcome whatever challenges come our way. And when it has to do with health-related stuff, we don't believe that if we were to build a much more healthy practice, both physically and mentally, that we would be able to work our way through this and overcome this discomfort that we are experiencing. And so we look to others in order to solve that for us, right? We look to our doctor to give us that elusive diagnosis that may or may not exist, right? And, a treatment that will make it all better, right? We look to others to really address that which we all along had the power to address on our own, with a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more self-awareness, and a little bit of commitment on our part. So does that sort of answer your question?
It totally answers my question. I think you're right. I agree with the self-efficacy piece. I've seen that in my own practice. So I'm glad that you articulated that. Okay. You kind of touched on this a little bit. We've only got this is like 1.5 questions left. You've kind of touched on this already. One of the questions was, how do I believe my doctor's diagnosis? Now, I think what happens is, you're right. People go in, they have their brain scan and they have, oh, phew, what a relief. The brain scan said I'm free. And then 12 minutes later, they have a thought that what if the doctor is wrong? What might they do?
Are you telling me that you could last 12 minutes?
12 seconds.
I could go about 4 minutes.
Right. I mean,
the minute I get back in the car and go and start driving home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay, between 12 seconds and 12 minutes, somewhere in that vicinity, how do they believe their doctors or their neurologists or whatever a diagnosis?
Yeah, it's those classic thoughts about maybe they missed something, or maybe they did the wrong test, or, if it's a couple of weeks later, maybe something wasn't wrong then, but there is something wrong now, right?
What if they got the
And so
test results mixed up?
what if they got the test results mixed? I could go on and on. I've had all the same
Yeah.
thoughts, right? But when it comes to believing the doctor, let's put it that way, for me, it really came down to playing the odds, right? Because when I would go to the doctor with something, and I wouldn't get my brain scanned right away necessarily, but let's use that headache analogy, right? But I would go to the doctor with a headache or something like that. Doesn't matter what it is. And she knows my history. Or if it was a walk-in clinic because I went to the last minute and I saw a doctor I'd never seen before, they asked me all the history. And they would maybe do an examination. I don't know, look in my ears, look down my throat, like whatever they do, they would do some sort of a basic assessment. Let's put it that way. And when a doctor does those sort of initial assessments or examinations, and they come to an opinion like, Christian, you're fine, go home, hydrate a little bit better, sleep a little bit better, get some exercise, etc. Right? I've read stats out there that sort of put a mark on how accurate doctors are on that sort of first visit. And it was like somewhere between 70 and 80% or something like that. So most of the time, they get it right. Convincingly, 70, 80%, that's pretty good. And so that, okay, so I feel better. I go home. Several days later, the headache goes away. But then a couple of weeks after that, it comes back, right? So now I have a little bit more evidence because the headache actually went away, right? I mean, it is possible that with certain illnesses, symptoms can come and go. Absolutely. But if it goes away for a while, it's usually a pretty good sign, right? And so I have a little bit more evidence. So maybe I will go from that 70 to 80% probability that, nothing is really worrisome here to 80 to 90%. But then maybe I rush back to the doctor sometime because I had the headache persist for another week or so. And the doctor says, okay, well, just to be sure, maybe we'll take a blood test or something like that. So we take a blood test, everything comes back fine. And then we're up to like maybe 85 or 90%, right? And then the pattern continues, as you know it does, where a couple of weeks later, we're still feeling a little bit uncomfortable. We go back to the doctor. Hey, the headache's back. What can we do? Okay, well, I really think everything's fine, but just to, reassure you, they would tell me sometimes, we'll just take a quick picture inside just to make sure nothing's going on, right? So they would send me for, X-ray, CT scan, whatever. And then those results would come back. And then you go up to like 99% likelihood that the doctor was right in the first place, right? And so you keep taking these steps. Whereas in the first place, I probably could have played the odds and been right in the first place anyways, and been fine and put it behind me and gone on about my life. But if you keep following down this path, not only are you reinforcing those negative behaviors that inevitably are going to keep you stuck and are going to ensure that not only do those symptoms persist, but also potentially worsen, and that other symptoms come into the picture as well, either now, concurrently, or later on. So you kind of dig your hole a little bit deeper, number one. And number two, in the meanwhile, you're missing out on opportunities, experiences, you're spending time, you're spending money, you're making choices that strain relationships, whether it's with your employer or with your family or friends or whoever. You keep making these choices that just the costs start to pile up for you in terms of your quality of life. But the benefits that you get as a result are falling through the floor, right? Because the chances that all of these choices that you're engaging with are for nothing, just keeps going up, right? And so at some point you got to play the odds, right? And stop engaging in those choices that are going to get you nowhere and start just accepting the evidence and making rational choices based on the information that you have given to you by professionals on account of very scientifically tried and true processes and tests and things like that. You just got to play the odds.
Right.
Right. And that's what it came down to for me. And once I started playing the odds, I've never regretted it.
Okay. That's amazing. And tolerating just the uncertainty, right? And
Yeah.
you still, even if you get the result, you still have to make space for uncertainty because it's going to be there, right?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, headache. You're
Yeah.
back again.
Yeah.
But you know what? I can't jump on Google right now because I need to do this.
Right.
I need to go pick up the kids from school and have a nice Friday afternoon. Sorry, headache.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And then by the time, you're laying in bed at night, probably the headache's gone. Right. So, you just got to look at it from that approach, take a step back and say, hey, what's really going on here? And make a note of the fact that, okay, I have a headache. That's interesting. But I'm going to go and I'm going to do what's important right now.
Right.
And I'll get back to that later if it's still around.
Okay. Amazing. Okay. Last question. And this is in capitals. So there are always in capital letters, new symptoms. Any advice?
Yes. Yeah. I kind of referred to it a little bit in my last answer, right? Where you keep digging the hole. And as you keep digging the hole by making those same choices over and over again, the ones that, eventually you'll recognize it's not working, right? And that was the point that I got to where I'd been taking the same approach based on these same anxious behaviors and these same misguided understandings of how the body works and what anxiety is and everything like that. Kept making these same choices over and over again. And it was laying in the hallway of the hospital because they weren't even worried about me enough to give me a proper room, right? Or even a curtain to hide behind, right? I was like, I've been following this same path in this same cycle for so long, thinking, oh, if just this symptom would go away, or just I would get an answer that this symptom is nothing to worry about, or I would just get diagnosis for that symptom.
Right.
Then I could follow whatever treatment plan, or I could put it behind me and then I would be fine. But inevitably, either it persisted or another symptom took its place, or both. Right. Like I ended up with two symptoms,
right.
So because as long as you keep doing what you've been doing, you'll keep getting what you've been getting.
Yeah.
Right.
Nothing changes if nothing changes.
Nothing changes if nothing changes. And I wasn't changing. Right. But that November morning, 2:00 in the morning, the late November evening, I was like, this has to stop. Obviously, I'm on the wrong path here. Obviously, I'm dealing with this in the wrong way. And obviously, I've been proving myself wrong and my doctor right over and over and over and over again. Right. So am I going to continue this for the rest of my life, or am I going to take a different approach? Right. And so if you find yourself constantly chasing symptom after symptom after symptom, you're probably in the same place that I was, and in the same place as so many other people who are challenged by health anxiety have been. Right. And you can either stay there and keep doing what you've been doing and keep getting what you've been getting, or you can take a step back and maybe accept that if you keep taking that approach, you're not going to get anywhere and that you need to make a change. And sometimes that is something that you can do on your own. Sometimes that is something that you need help with, right? And, for myself, I felt like I needed help. Remember, the self-efficacy was at an all-time low. And so I reached out to my doctor and I said, hey, doc, you've been right all along. I've been wrong all along. And I don't want to waste any more of your time nor mine. And so how can we take a mental health approach to this problem? And she said, okay, let's do that. And it was at that point that she stopped providing me so readily the reassurance that I craved all the time, stopped so readily sending me for tests that she didn't truly believe that I needed. And she did say, what you can do is you can go to counseling and you can take this medication. And I said, okay, give me the medication, give me the date and time and place, and I'll be there. And so I did that. I took the medication. I went to counseling, and it was good at first. With the medication specifically, I can't say that there was a moment where I felt like, oh, this is better. Where's this been all my life? I know that for some people that may be the case. I also know for some people they may be like, oh, I feel terrible taking this. So the experience with medication, to the point that you made earlier, varies greatly. But for the counseling, I found it interesting. However, I also found it interesting that there were many people there just like me. Some of them who were new, just like I was, but some of them had been there for years, and a couple of them even over a decade, and on the medication too. And so that's what sort of led me to where I am today, because I thought, well, if the medication's so good and the counseling works so well, then why are these people here like years or decades later? And it's not to pass judgment on them, because everybody's journey is different. But I was super motivated to make a change. And I said, I don't want to be here a decade later, still taking medication, number one, and still going to counseling,
Still
number
struggling.
2. And so that's when I started to do my own research. And that's when I started to look at it holistically, not just through the lens of medication and counseling, but I kept those doors open just in case they were part of they were two of the keys. I didn't know at the time. So I kept those doors open, but I started to look at my sleep habits, my diet, my exercise routine, my mindfulness practice, and all those other things that we talked about. And I pieced together an approach that made me feel better really fast. And I emphasized it by documenting it in a plan, just like we talked about earlier. And I took consistent action in accordance with that plan and came out the other end feeling, it was literally weeks, like 4 or 5 weeks before I felt like I had my life back, right? And I thought to myself at the time, well, I could stop here or I could just keep going, because I want more of this good stuff that's happening to me. So I kept going, ended up making my life even better than it was even before health anxiety was a thing in my life. And it was really great. And turned out for me that the medication wasn't one of those keys. And so I said to my doctor, hey, can we wind this down? And so we did it gradually. We did it the right way. And when I tapered off the medication, I never had a moment where I felt like, oh, I'm going to miss this. Right. So I kind of feel like it didn't help me. It didn't hurt me, but I helped myself. And that I realized that I had the power to do that all along. And that's when the self-efficacy started to come back, not just to where it was, but to where it could potentially be, which today is even higher.
Right. I love that story. Thank you for sharing all this with us. I'm gonna, that's the perfect place to end, because I think that is so empowering. Would you share with us where the listeners can hear about you and the work you're doing?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm most active on Instagram. So you can find me there at healthanxiety.coach. Or you can visit my website, which is healthanxiety.coach. And that's where you can, first of all, read about my story and the experience that I went through. And second of all, you can learn about the 30-day program, the 30-day Anxiety Detox, that all of my students go through, and hear about their experiences with the program in their own words, and exactly if that's something that you're interested in, you can learn exactly what you'll be doing and what you'll be accomplishing over those first 30 days, and even put in your email and get the first couple of days free so you can try it out.
Love it. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad that we caught up round 2. I think this is more applicable than ever. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. And you know what? There's a lot of people out there who are struggling right now. And that's why I wanted to come back, because the more we can do to get the word out about health anxiety and how people who are challenged by it aren't alone, but absolutely do have it in them to make life better and achieve that healthy life free of anxiety that they're looking for, the better. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.